Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and religion, where we will take it all very, very seriously, but not too seriously. A sports extravaganza, the return of Two Idiots Discuss Baseball, MLB Playoff Edition, and akin to the peace treaty between Palestine and Israel, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the end of the Soviet Union, Mike Ashley has sold Newcastle United. Anything is possible in this vast, this plentiful, and this forgiving universe that we live in. But all is not horseshoes and rainbows and 48-minute EDM songs. The new ownership group of Newcastle United troubles many as much as the old ownership group. We will discuss in detail. Without further ado.
Act 1. Two Idiots Discuss Major League Baseball Postseason.
Back by popular demand. And by popular demand, I mean there's probably 4 or 5 people who would actually look forward to hearing Two Idiots Discuss Major League Baseball Playoffs. Welcome back to the show, Brian.
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, good evening. How's everything your side today?
The sun is shining in Scottsdale, Arizona. There is not one cloud in the sky. The high today will be 90 degrees.
That's fantastic. There's actually one cloud in the sky today in the greater Northern Virginia area. It's one large cloud. It's gloomy. It's a little rainy. We have no blue skies.
As much as I might get frustrated with any element of my life, 9 months out of the year, living where I live is pretty much a wet dream.
Yeah, I agree. It's those 3 months that are the ninth layer of hell. That's the problem.
But to the extent that it is a problem, I'll take that problem over your winter any day of the week.
So would I. Absolutely.
So I wanted to start with of course, the elephant in the room. It is October the 6th. You and I have both witnessed the Boston Red Sox felling the New York Yankees and advancing into the playoffs to take on the Tampa Bay Rays. And I wanted to comment on the lead up to that game and the playoffs in general. I grew up, of course, in the DMV. I have always been favored, or I always leaned towards the East Coast teams. I never really gave a lot of credence to East Coast media bias. Now living in the Valley of the Sun, it's been interesting to watch the baseball coverage over the course of the last 3 weeks. The New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox, and whether or not they were going to make the playoffs, almost a nightly segment in baseball coverage, whereas the San Francisco Giants and the Los Angeles Dodgers were neck and neck in the West, and the Dodgers actually now find themselves having to play the Cardinals in a winner-take-all one-game playoff. The World Series champs don't even win their own division. I don't recall it being a storyline in the media at all. This is one of the few years as an East Coast native that I feel like that media bias was front and center. Your thoughts?
I agree completely. I think that, it always ends up being Yankees Red Sox for some reason in the media. Obviously, there's their national fan bases, but the Giants, what 106 games this season? They were running away with it, and I think they were completely under the radar. We just didn't. I remember when the Braves went out to the West Coast, and they're playing the Giants, and I'm starting to look at standings like, holy heck, what's going on here? And out of absolutely nowhere, the Giants took over, but it was not a story that we heard about. Everything was Yankees Red Sox. Right? And again, it's national draw. ESPN's in Connecticut. It's all Northeast. But I agree with you completely. This is one of those seasons where East Coast bias was was aplenty.
I am as you know, a adherent, a student of markets. I believe that markets control, and the sports media landscape is no different. It's a marketplace. They are going to provide the public. They're going to provide the consumer what sells, what they can actually peddle on a daily basis. So clearly, they know what they're doing. But it is apparent that there is this Northeast media bias, and I think that probably translates a little bit to even the Midwest. I thought it interesting, the Brewers, who we're going to get to because they're playing your Atlanta Braves in the playoffs, the Brewers run away with the Central, and the storylines, at least for the last couple of months, particularly at the trade deadline, are the Cubs fire sale and the fact that the Cardinals look to be floundering. Then the Cardinals go on their run to make the playoffs. That's the storyline from kind of the Midwest perspective. Really, no focus on the fact that the Brewers, from start to finish, they are a competent, then they are a capable, then they are a dominant baseball team, and they crush the rest of the division.
Right, absolutely. And again, out of nowhere, right? It's very under the radar. They absolutely destroy everybody until the Cardinals all of a sudden win 17 games in a row. Again, completely under the radar. It's just not a story that was there. But, you look at the Brewers, who they are, what the team is, what that pitching staff is, Craig Counsell pulling the switches on everything. It's a solid team. Formidable team. But, again, a lot of the focus was on, where are the Yankees right now? They're in third place. Not the fact that Tampa Bay's running away with the division again, right? Not the fact that the baby Blue Jays, if you will, are steamrolling people at times. Came up a few games short, one game short actually. But again, it was all that East Coast bias, and it is. It's based off those markets. It's the big money markets, and where are they going to get most of the media attention? New York, Boston, East Coast is what it is. We've had to suffer through it for generations. It ain't stopping now.
And I think not only is it not stopping now, it's probably going to get worse now because as consumer attention gets fragmented, they're going to have to do more and more. It's, like politics, it's like religion. Once you start to see the numbers dwindle in the overall marketplace for your product, you have to start feeding the adherents. You have to start feeding the faithful more and more what they want because you can't lose them, right?
Oh, agree. Absolutely. It's not changing. Those are what pays the bills, right?
That's a good way to put it. I mean, Red Sox fans, Yankees fans, that coverage not only pays the bills, but it probably allows for a lot of the money that they need to go and occasionally do that 30-second segment on the Giants being in first place in the West. Well, let's get to then the in-depth, the professional analysis that is your fandom, the Atlanta Braves versus the Milwaukee Brewers in the playoffs. You've already made mention of it. You don't have a lot of big names, I would think, from a nationwide perspective, from a national media marketplace perspective on that Brewers team, yet you've got a manager that knows how to pull the levers as well as any manager has pulled them probably in the last couple of decades.
Oh, I agree. And I think Counsell goes unheralded. I remember seeing him play in your Valley of the Sun years and years ago. He knows what he's doing, and he's got enough talent to make sure that he's pulling the right levers. The unfortunate thing that he doesn't have right now is a setup man, a former Rookie of the Year setup man that idiotically decided to get a little hammered and break his hand, punch a wall. So Mr. Devin Williams, sorry, buddy. I'm sure that was a rough conversation he had when he walked in 2 days later into the clubhouse with a black cast on his hand and had to explain to his teammates that he ain't going to be there no more. But other than that, it's small ball for the Brewers. It looks like.
So I want to talk about this very quickly. Where does he rank on the all-time list for stupid athletes? And I'm not going to get all of these, but this reminds me specifically of Gus Frerotte running the ball in when he was playing for the Deadskins and headbutting the wall in excitement and breaking a vertebrae in his neck. It reminds me of, and I can't remember the kicker's name, but a kicker, after making a field goal, jumping up and down and blowing out his knee and being out for the rest of the season. This is on that all-time list of stupidity where you are primed with a team to actually enjoy postseason success, and you hurt yourself not only thereby taking yourself out of this opportunity, but the team is actually in a very poor position because you're no longer participating.
I agree completely. The if I'm not mistaken, was it Grammatica that did that to his leg in celebration? The kicker.
Yes, I think you're correct. It is Grammatica.
Right, and just idiotic. And only second this season to the Atlanta Braves pitcher Huascar Ynoa, who was off to a massive start, finally a breakout season. Dude hit a grand slam early in the season. in his fifth or sixth start, after getting pulled after the fifth inning, he goes in, punches the wall of the dugout, and he's out for the rest of the season. Thank you very much, Huascar. But it's just idiotic, just absolutely idiotic.
So, having said that, you've got to be happy that the Brewers really don't have a setup man, and if anybody could manage around that, it's Counsell, but you're glad that he has to manage around it. How do you see the series playing out between the Braves and the Brewers?
Well, I think it's going to be it ain't going to be easy, right? It's going to be a tough series, but if you look at the Braves season this year, the adversity that they went through, and granted, it's the NL East, and the Mets it up again, as you and I talked about 2 months ago, the fact that this was going to happen. Well, it happened, right? The Phillies are the Phillies are the Phillies. Harper is Harper. MVP my ass. He goes 0 for 11 with 5 strikeouts against the Braves in the series that they got swept right out of the playoffs. But if you look at this Braves team, they lost their number 2 hitter, or the number 1 hitter. They lost the number 2 hitter and their number 4 hitter at the beginning of the season, right? Or in the midst of the season. Ronald Acuna got busted up his ACL midseason. He's gone. Possibly the best player in the league. He's gone. Marcell Ozuna breaks his hand, and in the midst of having his hand broken, decides to beat his wife. He gets arrested for domestic violence. You've got Travis d'Arnaud, the catcher, who's batting fourth, having a hell of a year. He gets busted up in a play at the plate, and where do you go from there? And Braves are still only 3 or 4 games back. So I think as you look at this, and you look top to bottom from a batting perspective, 1 through 8, anybody can take you deep, right? And it's not just that they lived off home runs all year. They've actually, if you look back at the San Diego series that they won 2 weeks ago, followed right back up with the Philadelphia series. A lot of those were 3-1 games. It wasn't a lot of home runs, but they figured out how to play. Now all of a sudden you get Charlie Morton, who's 39 years old, throwing a filthy curveball at the top of the rotation. You get Max Fried, also filthy at the top of the rotation, and then Ian Anderson, the sophomore, who's got a changeup and a fastball that come from the exact same spot. Changeup and a curveball that come from the exact same spot, and people just can't get a read on it. So you get those 3 guys at the top of a rotation with that lineup, man, they're going to be a tough out. They won less than 90 games through the season, but they're absolutely going to be a tough out in the postseason.
I agree with this. I think, strangely, the Braves having those injuries in the beginning of the season, is a blessing at the end of the season because they were able to weather that. They were able to bring in other people, and it's almost like they have a new team going into this postseason. So I think it's very astute that you're talking about how well they're playing together, how well they meshed. They lost all of this talent. You think that they're going to be done. The people that need to step up start to step up. They add pieces. And going into this playoffs, you don't have to start talking about how much production they lost out of Ronald Acuna because they have all these other guys who are stepping up and they're getting production out of 3 people that's actually in excess of what they would have gotten out of Acuna. They are I don't want to call them a complete team, but from an offensive standpoint, it's not like they have a lot of weakness when you start getting lower into their lineup. The guy who's hitting 7th, the guy who's hitting 8th, when you're thinking you're going to get that rocking chair inning, 7, 8, 9, those guys are just as much a threat.
Oh, without a question. And I think you're spot on. When Acuna blew his ACL, I looked at it and, and it was a tough road and it was a rough start to the season. Freddie Freeman started slow, but I see Acuna get hurt and get knocked out. And I'm like, we're done. It's it. But if Acuna doesn't get hurt, they don't pick up those 4 pieces. Right? Alex Anthopoulos doesn't go out and get those. He also signed every 37-year-old former catcher he could when d'Arnaud went out. Right? There were 3 or 4 guys above the age of 35 behind the plate for the Braves this year. What they piece together, but they don't do that if Acuna doesn't get hurt. It doesn't happen. And now all of a sudden they're meshing together, and we'll see what happens. They're playing strong. They're finally finishing games. There were a lot of games last year, the past couple of years, where they're down 2-3 runs in the 7th, 8th inning, and the game's not over. They're going to come back and win it. They didn't have those games at the beginning of the year this year, and over the past 6 weeks, it's come around. That's what's going to be interesting with it. Max Fried just got National League Pitcher of the Month for September. Goes 3-0 with a complete game shutout. He had 2 complete game shutouts in 5 weeks, I think. And in September has a 1-something ERA. And they're just clicking right now. The biggest challenge, I think, is the fact that they're going to be on a 5-day break before that next game.
Okay, so having said that, now it's time for us to demonstrate how poor we are in predicting. What is your prediction for the Braves and the Brewers? How many games? Who's going to win?
All right, so we got a 5-game set. Brewers have home field. If the Braves can pick one up in Milwaukee, then I think it goes 4. Right? I think if the Braves can pick one up in Milwaukee, it goes 4. I hate 5-game series. They're better than the one game playoffs that we've recently experienced. But I think Braves win it in 4. Obviously, I'm going to say Braves, but I think Braves win it in 4. I don't think they sweep them. They can. I think it's possible, but you got to win 2 in Milwaukee. With Truist Park in Atlanta, it's going to be absolutely on fire for those next 2 games. I don't see the Braves losing in Atlanta. I think if they can pull one off in Milwaukee, it goes 4. Otherwise, it's a toss-up in Game 5.
I'm actually going Braves in 4. I agree with you. I think that the Braves can get a split in Milwaukee. And after watching, I actually watched a number of the games leading up to the end of the season. The Braves when they played the Padres, because I'm out here on the West Coast. And I watched a couple of the Phillies. And really, I thought that the Phillies were going to beat the Braves. And the Braves pitching in what amount to playoff games absolutely lights out. So I'm thinking Braves in 4. Since we are talking on October 6th, 1-game playoff tonight between the Dodgers and the Cardinals. Who wins that game?
Oh, man, I couldn't wait to get to this thing. So let's talk about a Los Angeles Dodgers championship, world champion team that wins 105 games that has to play in a one-game playoff wild card game against the Cardinals, winning 17 in a row this season, one of the hottest teams in baseball. Nothing would make me happier than to see the Cardinals knock out the Dodgers in a one game playoff tonight. Much like my joy in seeing the Yankees get knocked out, I had some wagers with some fellas yesterday on the over under on how many earned runs Garrett Cole was going to give up. Buddy of mine had it at 5 and 4 innings. Well, fortunate thing for Garrett Cole, he didn't make it there. But I see the Cardinals tonight. You know, you've got Wainwright on the mound. Scherzer's a madman, obviously, Mad Max. But you've got Wainwright and Yachty as you know, on the mound and behind the plate today. Yachty's one of the best all time. I see the Cardinals winning this game tonight.
I agree with this, and it's only because the Cardinals went on that streak, and it reminded me of all the negativity I have against that team from the 80s into the 90s. Being a Mets fan, I don't have any love for either one of those teams, but when the Cardinals get going, it's almost like this ancient karmic thing that starts to happen. I would not want to face them in a one-game playoff, like you said, particularly with Wainwright taking the mound. And the Dodgers, to me, they have not proven themselves, even after having won the championship last year. I still don't have any faith in them in these kind of crunch time situations. And this is the type of situation that is prime for them to have another letdown, right? This is a game 6 or a game 7 for all intents and purposes. And if they don't have a massive lead, if they have to play in a very tight game, which I think both those factors are going to be in play, I don't think that there's going to be a lot of runs scored. And I don't think that there's going to be any moment where it's not going to be tight assholes. I think Cardinals, I think the Dodgers fail. That means San Francisco Giants, St. Louis Cardinals. Who you got?
That's also going to be a tough one. I think that Cardinals, Giants ran the gamut all season. You know, every time that they've done this and won the West, they've gone on to win the World Series, if I'm not mistaken. I saw a statistic a couple weeks ago. However, I don't know if it's a team that's built for the playoffs. It's built to win a lot of games. I don't know that it's a team that's built for the playoffs. But we'll see. I think that's also going to be a tough one. I think that goes 5 games. And it's a toss-up. Maybe Cardinals in 5. If the Cardinals can pick one off in San Francisco, you know, maybe it's Cardinals in 4. You know, same as the Braves.
I'm actually going Giants in 4. I think the Giants are going to win 1 in St. Louis. I think they're going to win both at home. I think they win 1 in St. Louis. Giants in 4. And then I'm going to go Giants against the Braves. I'm going to go Giants in 5 against your Atlanta Braves. I know you don't want to hear that, but I actually think the Giants, after, again, living here on the West Coast, seeing them stomp on the Diamondbacks numerous times, and again, the Diamondbacks are atrocious. That's not really a good litmus test or a barometer of how good a baseball team is, whether or not they can beat up on the lowly Diamondbacks. But I just think the Giants, they're clicking on all cylinders. I think they do everything well. And because they are so under the radar, that's going to surprise some people. But I think the Giants are going to go to the World Series.
I think it's a good possibility. I'm still going to go Braves in 6 on that call. You know, Braves went they went 1-2 in San Francisco in the only series they played. That was in the midst of one of their more difficult road stints. It was a huge win against San Francisco that Sunday, right up leading to the 3 out of 4 game run against the Diamondbacks of the Valley. But I'm still going to go Braves in 6, and call me a homer, 100%. You know, I'm going to go Braves in 6. Is it the smart play? I don't know. Is it the money play? Probably not. But I'm still going to go Braves in 6, and it's going to be dependent upon the pitching staff. If Morton, Max, and Ian Anderson can all click click on all cylinders, they're just going to be tough to beat across the board. They're going to be tough to beat. Bullpen's lights out. From 1 to 8 in the lineup, you are at any point in time somebody can smoke one out. I just think it's too tough an out.
Hey, I wouldn't expect anything less. The way that team played this year, the way they came together, as a fan, I would expect nothing less from you. If the New York Metropolitans had played like that over any stretch of their seasons over the course of the last, 6-7 years, I would have thought, right, since their World Series appearance, I would have thought that they're on their way back to another appearance. So let's switch to the American League. And a series, again, I feel like there's just been so much bias based on the fact that the Yankees and the Red Sox, are they going to make the playoffs, are they not? You've got the two old hats, the managers, Houston versus the White Sox. I'm sorry, I should say the Astros versus the White Sox. You've got Dusty Baker, who has done an excellent job with the Astros this year. And then you've got the old Cardinals manager, La Russa, for the White Sox. Who do you see in that series?
I gotta go Houston. Let's call it the geriatric series, right?
Exactly.
La Russa's done a hell of a job. I got a buddy of mine who's a White Sox fan, and he's grumpy and angry anyway. He's from Philadelphia. They're all just grumpy and angry. But he's a White Sox fan, and he was pissed about the La Russa hiring. I'm like, dude, he's proven winner, right? And that's what's going to be. And you've got two guys that, again, can pull levers, know what they're doing. They've got history. But I got to go Houston just because of the pedigree.
I agree. I actually think that Houston has been much aligned because of the cheating scandal, and rightfully so. But there's still a ton of talent on that team. So it's going to be hard, X's and O's aside, they're just a better baseball team in my mind. So I'm going with Houston as well. And that leads us to Boston versus Tampa Bay. Who do you see winning that series?
Tampa Bay. They got too many arms, man. They've got 5 or 6 guys under the age of 24 that can just come out and throw gas. I think it's just too much. I think it's way overpowering. They absolutely ran away with that division. It is a good ball club. I think they have too many arms. They've just got too many arms. They're, as an organization, they're smarter than you. They know what they're doing. They've got the young people. It's one of the smallest payrolls in baseball, but they've just got too many arms. I think it's going to go Tampa Bay in 4. It'll be Houston in 4, maybe 5. But I think you got to go Tampa Bay. You?
Tampa Bay is everything the Oakland Athletics wanted to be in the Billy Beane era. Just trying to play that small ball, the trades, all the things that they did. They could never put it together in the playoffs. Tampa Bay not only has put it together in the playoffs, I think they're primed for another run. I agree with you. I think that they're going to win. I actually think it's going to be Tampa Bay in 3. They know Boston very well, being a division opponent. And again, Boston was up and down a number of times over the course of this season. So I think it's going to be Tampa Bay against Houston. I think Tampa Bay is going to beat Houston. And I'm going to then ask you, the Braves versus the Tampa Bay Rays. Do you see the Braves actually beating Tampa Bay in a World Series 7-game playoff?
I got a shot. Again, look at the lineup. It's pitching against hitting at that point in time. I think they've got a shot. It depends. The challenge with the Rays, and you mentioned this, they never really moved it into the playoffs. I agree with you 100%. It's what Billy Beane wanted to be for years, and Oakland's still done well. They've just not been highly successful. But you got to have a mixture of analytics and old school baseball gut, right? We saw that in the World Series last year when Snell gets pulled, before he faces the lineup for the 3rd time. They're looking hard at the numbers. He gets pissed. He ends up leaving. He should have stayed in that game. He could have won it. should have stayed in that game. But if they stick too much to the analytical game or analytics game, which, history says they will, I think that can come back to bite them, right? Sometimes you've just got to let guys go. Sometimes you just got to let Max Fried pitch nine innings, right? He had 2 shutouts in under 100 games, or under 100 pitches. I just think that can come back to bite you in playoff baseball. And playoff baseball is absolutely one of my favorite times of the year, right? Playoff baseball, playoff hockey, and I'm not a huge hockey fan, but those two are just phenomenal. But I think the analytics can come back to bite you at the wrong time, as was proven last year.
I agree with this in its entirety. I think the Rays often play the numbers too much, and that's really, I made this point when I had a segment on analytics earlier in one of the other podcasts that I did, that if you can't go with your gut and analyze the situation that you face in that moment, the human beings that are actually present in that moment, and make a call, you're often going to be at a disadvantage because the numbers don't play out in that one situation over and over and over again, right? Numbers, you have this huge body of data and you're thinking, okay, well, 8 times out of 10 this, 14 times out of 20 that. But you've got to look at the human beings that are involved in that particular situation, in that moment in time, with the weight of the world on their shoulders. And then you've got the weight to make a call one way or the other. And I don't know that the analytics are any advantage in that moment. Relying on them can be to your detriment, which is why I always have believed, and I've maintained, this is the reason why the Athletics only get it as far as they've gotten. That's the reason why the 76ers, right, for all of the hype that led up to the team being put together, are sitting in the situation that they're sitting in now, where they've got players that don't want to play with each other anymore and that want to leave that team having not won the NBA championship. And that is why I believe that in the series between the Tampa Bay Rays and the San Francisco Giants, the Giants are going to win. The Giants are your 2021 World Series champions.
Much to my chagrin, in that series, you're right. I think I think they've got too much experience. Buster Posey, who may be 72 years old, is still behind the plate, but they've got too much experience in it. They have done well all season. In that series, I agree with you. It's gonna be, can Tampa Bay get that balance of analytics and old school baseball gut, right? That's what, and I'll go back to the Braves. I've obviously watched them all season, much to my wife's chagrin, most every game all season. But, Brian Snitker, he doesn't waver. You never know what's going through his head. He's got the same look on his face every time. And Will Smith, as pissed off as I got and buddies of mine got at him all season, every time he walked something, every time he gave up a run, every time he blew a lead, didn't matter. Snicker said, listen, he's the closer. He's our guy. That's not going to change. And what happened last week of the season? He killed it. He absolutely killed it. So you've got to have some of that in you. I believe in the analytics. I do agree that does help. There is something to it. There's something to launch angle. There's something to how many times is a batter going to see a pitcher in a game? But you've got to look, to your point, at those two individuals at that point in time. Does it make sense to pull them? Snell never should have gotten pulled out of that World Series game last year.
Agreed. 100% agreed. And I think that was, again, analytics playing games. That's ego playing games with what those individual players in the game, with the manager, what was going on. It was a terrible call. And I think that universally people felt when he was coming out, when Snell was coming out, in particular, the Dodgers hitters, they all thought, this is a bad idea. Even the Dodgers hitters were saying, that's a bad idea for Tampa Bay, thank God. So,
Exactly.
yep.
Exactly.
Well, Brian, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your insight, and we will see probably in 10, 12 days how we were both proven wrong. Once again, all of our decisions, once again, all of our predictions fall flat, but it's always great to have you on.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the time. Continue to do a hell of a job with the podcast. I'm very much looking forward to evenings 3 and 4 with Mother Ayahuasca. So I'll look forward to those. Enjoy the playoffs. We'll get together again after, dare I say, Jocktober.
That sounds good. That sounds good. Thank you, Brian.
All right, talk to you soon.
Act 2, The Real Skinny on the Newcastle Takeover.
It actually appears to be done. It actually appears to be done, dear listener. Mike Ashley has sold Newcastle United to a group of investors, one of which, I believe the primary investor, is the Public Investment Fund in Saudi Arabia. I believe the total price is what Ashley was looking for all along, in excess of £300 million, £305 million to be exact, roughly $415 million. So the albatross of Mike Ashley is gone from Newcastle United. Let the heavens rejoice. What's that? There's boos, there's hisses, there's yet more consternation concerning the ownership of Newcastle United. What could it be? Well, it appears that because the Saudis are involved in any way, shape, or form, human rights groups in particular, but a number of different types of stakeholders have come out against the Public Investment Fund in Saudi Arabia being involved in the ownership of any Premier League team. Interestingly enough, the backdrop in the media has been the Premier League shares such concerns. Is it possible to separate the ownership interests from the Saudi royal family, from the crown in Saudi Arabia, from this public investment fund as it is referred to? An investment fund that is purported to be for the sake of the people of Saudi Arabia. An easy analogy for us in the West, it's a union. You've got a number of union members, then you've got your bureaucracy in the union, and then you've got a union head. And the union, based on all of the money that it's bringing in, actually makes investments for the benefit of its membership. Or at least, that's what they are told. That's what the public is told. But how involved are the individual stakeholders, the individual principals in a union? How involved are they in the investments they make? Well, as time has shown, when you have organized crime infiltrating these unions, the stakeholders, the principals, can be very involved in the management of whatever the investment is that the union is making. Between the outcry for human rights violations, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist for the Washington Post, and this concern that the crown, that the royal family of Saudi Arabia is going to be specifically or heavily involved in the management of Newcastle United, the Premier League could hide behind these things to try to hold up the sale of Newcastle to this public investment fund. Bullshit. Complete and total bullshit. None of the Premier League teams, no one in the bureaucracy of the Premier League, none of its principals had any concern whatsoever about the public investment fund, about the Saudi royal family, or about any human rights violation ever committed by anybody in Saudi Arabia. None of these issues matters to anyone in the Premier League. None whatsoever. Well then, Mr. Smarty Pants, why did the Premier League hold up the sale of Newcastle United to this public investment fund for close to a year? I know you think that this planet spins round based on the law of gravity. No, dear listener, no. That's why I'm here. That's why this podcast exists. This planet spins round based on money. It's all about the money. Let's talk about how money compromised the sale of Newcastle United to this Saudi public investment fund. Around June of 2017, the Middle East was in an uproar. A number of countries in the Middle East cut off diplomatic ties with the nation of Qatar. Qatar is a very interesting country in the Middle East. It is somewhat of a Switzerland in that it does not have very strong religious ties to either Sunni or Shia Islam. Certainly, within the nation, individuals lean heavily in favor of Sunni or Shia Islam. But as a nation, Qatar embraces a number of Western, of liberal principles that would not be acceptable in any other Middle Eastern country, namely freedom of the press. Let's start there. Al Jazeera. When you hear the name Al Jazeera, it has gotten smeared in the West as some sort of Islamic puppet, of some sort of journalistic entity out there to promote Islam. What I love about that moniker is that under a true journalistic banner, everyone should hate you. You should piss off everyone under the sun. Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, capitalists, communists, socialists, Republicans, Democrats. True journalists understand that they have to speak truth to power, and very often as power shifts, they will inevitably have to speak the truth to people that they were once either friends with or allied with politically or socially or religiously. This is the loneliness that is being a true journalist. In the Middle East, Al Jazeera is not looked on as a puppet of Islam. It is not looked on as an organization carrying the water of one sect of Islam or the other. In fact, Al Jazeera is often seen as an infidel because of the types of stories that it will cover, because of the types of investigations that it will do. It is often seen as an apostate, as an infidel. The Saudi royal family, in particular, hates Al Jazeera. Put a bookmark in that, dear listener. We'll come back to it. Now, there are a number of elements within the country of Qatar that are sympathetic to, if not diplomatically open to, relations with Iran. Yes, the same Iran that is the mortal enemy of one Saudi Arabia, of one Saudi royal family. In 2017, a number of nations that are diametrically opposed to Iran, a number of nations that are Sunni Muslims, where Iran is predominantly Shia Muslim. These countries do not get along because of religious differences, and a nation like Qatar gets caught up in this. So these nations that are strict Sunni adherents come out and say Qatar is supporting terrorism because of its sympathies towards Iran. Bad, Qatar. Bad. They break off diplomatic ties. It's a shit show for a number of Western nations because what do we want out of any of these actors anyway? Some cooperation so we can get that oil. It's a diplomatic morass. In the midst of said diplomatic morass, another company that is based in Qatar that is a internationally known brand. It's called BN. BN is a media broadcaster. BN has an entity called BN Sports. You can actually get sports content here in the United States from BN. BN Sports, located in Qatar, owned by principals within the nation of Qatar. BN signs what I believe to be a $1 billion contract with, guess who? The Premier League. To do what? To broadcast Premier League games all over the Middle East. And that's precisely what they do. Strangely, In the middle of this diplomatic crisis, there is pirating of Premier League games from an independent source in Saudi Arabia. This independent source begins to broadcast Premier League games for free all over the Middle East. As you can imagine, in the midst of the diplomatic crisis, the folks at BN had very few outlets for recourse, given that they had paid, again, I believe it was over $1 billion. It may have been plural, more than $1 billion, several $billion dollars for the broadcast rights, the exclusive broadcast rights to the Premier League in the Middle East. And there's this curious independent entity in the middle of Saudi Arabia pirating the broadcasts and distributing this content for free. This became a huge issue for the people, the principals in the front office of the Premier League, and namely the teams in the Premier League. Money out of the owners' pockets, the individual clubs, the money that they would be getting for the broadcast rights based on where they placed in the Premier League is being compromised by the fact that one of their partners is having their broadcasts pirated and content is being distributed for free. Advertisers are not happy about this. BN Sports is not happy about this. The Premier League is not happy about this, and the individual club owners are not happy about this. This is made known to many people in Saudi Arabia. Dear authoritative, dear totalitarian regime, you have an independent provider pirating our broadcasts. Smash those fucks. Are you honestly trying to tell us that you can't find in your own country, under the paradigm of how your government operates? Are you trying to tell us that you can't find out who's doing this? As much as you may be having skepticism in your head, dear listener, and wondering to yourself, how was this allowed to go on? In a way, it wasn't allowed to go on. It was brought to light and questioned publicly. How? Well, remember that little piece we went over about Al Jazeera? Oh, they found this to be quite newsworthy, quite a riveting story to investigate and to continue to discuss. Read between the lines, dear listener. It's clear that in that type of regime, in that type of country, where you have concerns over and over again about how intermingled the Saudi royal family is with any of the entities doing business with any of the countries in the West or anywhere else in the world, in the midst of this diplomatic crisis, you have a Qatari-owned entity having their broadcasts pirated, having that content distributed to all of the same users, all of the same end consumers. Tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars lost, and the government had no real input as to who the perpetrator was and what efforts they were taking to put an end to it. Strangely, mysteriously, if you will, or more likely, with precise and perfect timing, those pirated broadcasts just went away. The whole thing just disappeared. Lo and behold, Mike Ashley gets into negotiations with an investment group that's going to buy Newcastle United. And because nothing stays secret, but for so long in the 21st century, it turns out that it is a Saudi-backed group, and that backing includes the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. What do you think the Premier League said about that? What do you think any of the individual owners said about that? Mike Ashley, not only is he not a fan favorite of Newcastle United supporters, Mike Ashley isn't too popular in the front office of the Premier League, nor is he that popular with the other owners. They know he's been trying to sell that club for more probably than it's worth. They know that he is always treading water, that he really doesn't care about anything but the bottom line. And yes, they don't care about anything but the bottom line either. But God bless, man, have a better public persona, have a better front facing, have a better posture about what you're doing. Ashley's always been brazen. It's all about the money. He is the weakest. He is the worst when it comes to public relations, when it comes to marketing. His efforts are always laughable, if not half-assed. He has his media sycophants. He has people that he's plugged into that he can go and leak stories, but at this point, no one buys any of it. So the owners look at this deal, the Premier League looks at this deal, and thinks to themselves, these are the motherfuckers that have been stealing our broadcast and are now going to come in and buy one of these clubs and benefit from the contract that we had signed with BN Sports for distribution of this content after they had just stolen money out of our pockets? Here's where smart public relations folks, here's where savvy media actors come into play. Hey, look, Saudi Arabia bombs women and children in Yemen. Hey, look, Saudi Arabia kills its own citizens that speak out against the regime. Hey, look, the finances here are murky, and we're not sure whether or not the Public Investment Fund is going to be acting independently of the royal family. Let's hold up this sale. The media, pundits, for their part, they play along. They know who they're dealing with. This is high-level stakes. Anyone who's going to blow the lid on what's really going on is probably going to lose their access to individual clubs, their players, the managers, owners. They're going to lose their access to the league in general. They're certainly not going to be a fan favorite of anyone in Saudi Arabia. But what happened here is clear. Based on differences in religion, a couple of nations got into a pissing match, and one of them used pirating content from a provider in the other nation as leverage for diplomatic and economic sanctions. And while at the time that probably looked to be a savvy strategy on the part of the principals in Saudi Arabia, once they realized that they might actually be a partner to the people that they were screwing over in England, even though it was really a savvy, a strategic idea to hurt a Qatari company, once they realized that they were actually stepping on the toes of the people that they may want to get married to for decades to come, well, they changed their tune on that pirating thing. Religious conflict leading to diplomatic conflict, leading to tortious business interference to exercise political, to exercise economic leverage, and then, oops, we're actually, ultimately, shitting where we eat. You want to see a journalist come out of the woodwork? Let's find the person that can actually illuminate what kind of backroom deal was made between the Public Investment Fund, the Premier League, and a number of these owners for the lost revenues for all those pirated broadcasts. That's what held up this sale. Now, as far as all the moralizing on whether or not having the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia as an ownership interest in a Premier League club, whether or not there's problems with that, this is the very reason I started this podcast. Just like there's no politician that's your friend, there's no ownership group. There's no owner that's your friend. They have a product, you are a consumer. That's the relationship. It's my own affinity, it's your own affinity that allows them to be the treacherous, to be the duplicitous, to be the money-hungry scoundrels that they are. Who do you think that's going to attract to the marketplace for sports ownership? Saints? Is it really going to bring saints? No, dear listener, it's going to bring sinners. As a fan of Newcastle United, I really don't know how I'm going to feel about this in a year or two. I've heard a number of Newcastle fans mirror this sentiment. It's like a band that you fall in love with. It's a TV show, and one of the main characters is switched out. The entire premise of the show is the same, but one of the characters now is a different actor or a different actress. The band is the same, the music, the genre is the same, but one of the musicians is different. How are you going to feel about that content in a year, in 2 years? How am I going to feel about Newcastle United when they go out and start spending $200-300 million a year to bring in new players? I'm sure on the day of the match, I'm going to feel really good about it because they're not going to look so listless. They're not going to look so lifeless. They're not going to be so pathetic in their execution that I can't watch an entire 90-minute match. But am I going to have the same loyalty? Am I going to have the same passion? I doubt it. I really do. I doubt it. And this, as I've said before, is not an anomaly in sports. This is the direction of sports. This is what we're all going to have to get used to as sports fans. Teams we love, the affinity that we hold so dear, being managed, being run, operated, and in particular being owned by bad people. People that we know are bad. The benefits of which are benefiting bad people. A lot of boo-hooing over the fact that, oh, now you're going to be rooting for a team with bad owners. These are bad people. How can you root for this team? How do you think that they got the money in order to buy Newcastle? Keep it to your Twitter feed. Don't try to push that shit off on me. Do you have a car? Do you actually put gas into a car? How do you think that they got the money? How do you think that the Saudi royal family came into the money in order to have a public investment fund that could have investments in practically every element of Western life all over the world? You like that phone? You think that that phone makes you a genius and you can type out your 256 characters and reveal to the world what a complete and total jackass you are? How do you think you got that phone? Don't think that the oil isn't instrumental in all of the plastics necessary to create such a mobile, such a lightweight device. Even if you think, well, I drive an electric car. How do you think that electric car has so many of its lightweight parts? It's oil-based. It's an oil derivative. Because you know I have to, there's an episode of The Simpsons where in class, Mrs. Krabappel puts on one of those educational films, and it's A World Without Zinc. And in the vacuum of this little film, you see the character going through his everyday life without zinc and all the things that would be taken away from him. And then at the end, he has this revelation. Oh, how necessary. Oh, how important our sacred zinc. It's funny because it's so true. And it's so true that we need our sacred oil. When you're ready to give it all up, I'll be right behind you. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.